presenter, Dr. Johann Nicolai. He is an independent researcher from Berlin, and the intrigue of his paper lays on the story of a man from Breslau travels around the world. The escape route of the Breslau Jew Bodo Lange to Chile.
It's not working with my computer here.
Okay, so what we can do?
Can I use the computer? I have it all on my.
Yes, so simple task, not to miss
Yes.
so many of those gadgets on the table.
Okay.
Okay.
Nee, Sie müssen nur rechts auf den kleinen Pfeil gehen, damit man die Listen ausmacht.
Genau.
Hier Klick.
Ja.
Ja. So, ja.
Aber ich will das hier auch ausgegangen. Das war nur die Seite.
Achso, das weiß ich nicht so richtig.
Genau.
Wenn du abfällt, nein, einfach auf
Full screen of
Yeah.
Genau.
Yeah, super. Yeah.
Okay, so now I'm ready after all the technical issues.
Yeah.
So as I said, I will speak today about a Breslau Jew named Bodo Lange. He wasn't famous at all, he was just a simple person, and his escape route to Chile. So just some information about his family backgrounds, which I basically puzzled together from newspaper announcements. He was born in Breslau, or today Wrocław, on the 16th of January 1907, into a relatively religious family. He was aware of his Jewishness, but he was more liberal. He wasn't extremely religious. He got married to Annemarie Zerkowski in 1935. Also she was from Silesia, but from the city of Glogau. And in the year 1936, their only daughter Miriam was born. We can see here the announcement of their birth. And about the living, Bodo Lange made his living as a bank employee for two Jewish banks, the Bratislava Bank and the Efria Bank. The family resided in the Gartenstrasse 46, which is right next to the central railway station of Breslau. And about the income of the family, one could say they could even afford a housekeeper, that was Mrs. Busch. So we could say that it was still a solid middle class situation, even after the Nuremberg laws. Now the uprooting process and the displacement started with the November program of 1938, when Bodo Lange was arrested as an Aktionsjude. Aktionsjude was a program, let's say that way, by the Nazis, where about 30,000 Jews were arrested, to put more pressure on them to leave the country and to Aryanize their property, so to steal their property. Like most Aktionsjuden, Lange was released from Buchenwald already in mid of January 1939, so he was arrested about 3 months. He immediately began to plan his family's immigration from Germany in spring 1939, and he reflected on this event later in an article he wrote in 1969, so 30 years after, that described how he departed from Breslau. The article was called Abschied von Breslau, Departure from Breslau, which only gave some ideas how this experience must have been. He described it as traveling through the city was an experience like a roundabout of memories, so he was reflecting about his youth in childhood in the city. He was aware, of course, that he would never see Breslau again, certainly not in this condition. And he also knew that most of the relatives waiting him would die when the train passed the city, would either be murdered in the gas chambers or be scattered in exile. So he was very aware of the fact that his entire life situation would change drastically when he left Breslau. So he chose as an escape route not Kaunas and the Trans-Siberian Railway, but rather taking the Lloyd Triestino from Genova in Italy. He boarded the ship on April 20, 1939, on board of the ocean liner SS Giulio Cesare, with about 450 other Jewish refugees. During the journey, it wasn't a cruise ride at all, rather on the contrary. It was, there were a lot of conflicts between the ship's crew and the immigrants due to some cruise provocations. For example, the ship was called Ship of Criminals. Some passengers that booked a private bathroom were denied to use this bathroom just for themselves. They were forced to share it. There was some kind of violence occurring all the time involved. So it wasn't really a nice trip. The route went from Genova via the Suez Channel to Aden in Yemen, Colombo, and finally reached Shanghai on May 15, 1939. Like the most of the passengers on board, most of the immigrants were left rarely the boundaries of their home cities. So the journey was very impressive and also overwhelming for them. And even the arrival in Shanghai was even more an overwhelming experience. Lange reflects on that when he described his own impressions. He said when he saw the skyline of Shanghai for the first time, this is a picture here on top, the Bund. He had really deep doubts how he could make a survival in such a place. But the first experience in Shanghai was rather easy because immigration was not complicated. There was no visa required due to the international status of the city. You can see it here on the second picture. The city was split into different international concessions, so it was not problematic to arrive there. The first thing that happened to the immigrants was that they were brought to the Schaufeng Road. I will show it on a map immediately. Half an hour from the port on lorries, and lived in the first week in a 20 square meter room on mattresses together with 9 other persons in very horrible conditions in Hongkou, which is in the Japanese concession. This neighborhood, there's something also to say about that. It was partly destroyed by the Japanese attack of 1937 and 8. It was also an industrial neighborhood, so not really a comfortable environment. After this first week, the Lange family was informed that refugees could look for a room on cost of the Shanghai Jewish Aid Committee, and that's why they started to look for a new place, and they found this place in the wardrobe. I will also show it to you immediately. So here we have a map of Shanghai in 1935, so right before the arrival. The Bund, this is the harbor here, and they were brought by lorries crossing the Garden Bridge down the Broadway all the way here to this neighborhood. This is Jiaofeng Road, and over here this is Ward Road. So they basically stayed here in this eastern neighborhood. We can also understand why the bombing of the Japanese was very easy. So the river ends here in the ocean. Japanese ships could just travel up the river and attack this neighborhood. And the next chapter, the situation got even worse. There was survival in wartime. Overall, the hygienic conditions were very poor, and there was no running water, no water closet, only buckets. And these buckets were emptied every morning by small trolleys. And Lange and his family called this trolleys sarcastically the 4711 trolleys, named by the old colon because they must have been extremely smelly. And this is maybe the kind of humor they used to survive this situation. The food was also very basic. It just consisted of carrots, rice, and pulses, and maybe a sauce, so extraordinarily limited. At least it was provided by the Jewish Immigration Aid, so it was for free. Yeah, as I said, there was no running water, so hot water had to be bought either for tea in the morning or a bath in so-called hot water shops. This is here on the picture. So it had to be bought for a few cents from those shops. The reason for that, there was a danger of fire hazards, so it had to be prepared in these shops to secure the security of the neighborhood. In October 1939, the Jewish Aid Committee in Shanghai ran out of money, and the Lange family had to move back to the refugee home from their first place they lived in Ward Road, again to the Schaufeln Road. And as Mr. Lange pointed out, he shared this room this time with 4 more persons from Breslau, so at least he was among with his people in this reception. In April 1940, Lange received a grant of $100 from the Haysem in Paris. This is another Jewish aid organization in which Professor Liza Roberts mentioned today. He is involved in this. It's a merger of 3 other aid organizations of Judaism, and received this money that he applied for before he left Breslau. Because of this little money he received, he could move out again from the refugee home and move to Sud Road, which is also in this neighborhood I just showed you. The money was used by Lange not only to find a place for his family, but also to buy books from German refugees, to establish a small lending library called Honkyo Library to secure some basic income. Interesting about Lange is that he was able to establish friendships with local Chinese people, but and also with Japanese people. He moved again in September 1941 to a better place, so somehow this lending library helped them to stabilize the income, even though the situation was still very basic. And they moved to McGregor Road, also in the Honkyo neighborhood. The room was entirely full of bugs, and one of the walls was always wet, so you can understand this wasn't also a very nice place. They shared the house with 2 Japanese, which Mr. Lange named personally because somehow he could relate to them, Mr. Andor and Mr. Nagata. 2 Russians he didn't name at all, and 3 other German Jewish refugees he also didn't mention by name. The situation changed drastically again for the family in February 1943, when the Japanese created a Jewish ghetto in Honkyo, in the eastern part of Shanghai. As Mr. Lange at least says, by German influence, and also connected obviously with the outbreak of the war in the Pacific. Therefore, the Lange family had to move again to the Quenmin Road, and there they stayed until 1947. The landlord there was Mr. Lowe, with whom they finally became friends. Lange convinced Mr. Lowe to use Japanese anti-bug powder against the plague of bugs, and to which the Chinese family refused because they said, well, it's Japanese powder, we don't want to use it because it was produced by our enemies. We don't know what's maybe inside of it. But Lange said, no, you can use it, it's effective, and that's how they got rid of the bugs. And as a gift in return, Mr. Lowe gave money to Mr. Lange when he left Shanghai in 1947. Despite Mr. Lange's remark, well, I might not be able to repay you the money. And Mr. Lowe said, well, either I've done a good deed, or you will return the money to me, and I will know that you are better off now. The situation ended finally with the end of World War II, which again increased the danger in the situation. The Americans began to bombard Honkyo in July 17th, 1945, because a Japanese radio station was located in this neighborhood. And this unfortunately also caused 32 Jewish casualties and many injuries. And as we can understand that the hygienic conditions were horrible in that area, injuries was a great threat to life as well. And even after the war, the situation was very problematic, because the Chinese Civil War began a return that existed before the outbreak of the Second World War. And the communist forces came closer and closer to Shanghai. That was the reason the Americans finally decided to use troop transport vessels that previously were used to evacuate soldiers from their country, from Shanghai, or from Asia, also for Jewish immigrants that still lived in Shanghai. And that is how the Langer family could emigrate by the USS Walter Gordon on June 29th, 1947. They finally arrived in Santiago de Chile since Bodo Langer's brother Gerhard lived there. Here we have a little announcement that Bodo Langer now became a shop owner of fashion. And basically the family story also continued there. So his daughter Miriam got engaged and finally married to Heinz Kluge, which family background I don't know very much. But at least he mentioned that the German-speaking Jewish community of Santiago was founded by Breslau Jews and very much dominated by them. So as he expressed it, the first place in the synagogue was always reserved for Breslauians. So maybe his son-in-law was also from Breslau. Another interesting aspect about Bodo Langer is that he also began to reconnect with other Jews from Silesia, in particular from Breslau, after the war. He began to donate to the Verband der ehemaligen Breslau und Schlesien Israel. This is an organization created in the 1950s by immigrants to Israel, but also creating a connecting network all over the world. And he began, first of all, to give money to them, but also contributed to the newsletter of this organization by sharing his memories. So we can see here the headlines of his three articles. Two of them are quite short, that are the first two. And the third one is what my presentation is based on, where he was given more room. He was telling about his experiences in Shanghai on about 6 pages. And the last life sign of his, we learn in his obituary, which was also published, this is here on the bottom right, which basically reflects his life again and about his difficulties living in Shanghai and that he finally made it to Chile. So his conclusion about his life would be, es hätte nicht so sein müssen. This is what he says in one of his articles. He was obviously an example of a German Jew that was uprooted from his origins and barely escaped from being killed by the Nazis. He was originally from a solid middle class, and he never really reached that level again. He lived under horrible conditions in Shanghai and finally became a simple shop owner in Chile. Maybe one little positive thing one could say about his experience in Shanghai, that this international experience opened him up and he was able to make friends with Asians from China and Japan he would have never met otherwise. And the conclusion, as I said, is it didn't have to be this way. He would have probably very much preferred to stay in Breslau for his whole lifetime, and simply history went another way. So this is it.
Thank you. Time for questions, and next time the time for coffee.
Okay.
We can make this.
Thank you very much for this presentation, impressive. And I have 2 short remarks. First is this ship travel trip to Shanghai. It was very different. Other Jews told that it was the last time they had German culture, and they felt very, very good and very rich till they were on this boat and they had no conflicts. Yeah. So it is.
It's a different experience.
Yes,
yes. Check other sources.
Yes.
Many travelers on that boat said had this experience.
Yes.
Was really rough.
That's the first. And the second is, it's quite amazing that he didn't return to Europe like the most immigrants from Shanghai. Also, they came as communists to GDR and so on. But maybe the reason was that his brother, the next family member, was in South America. But it's also not quite average biography.
And I would also say the reason he didn't return to the GDR was his political ideas. I mean, if he was a bank employee, he was probably more leaning to the right, so he wasn't interested in returning to a communist country. So that's why Chile was more interesting to him.
With his family today?
Please.
This family, well, this is something I don't know. It's basically all his life story stopped with his death. So his family wasn't interested in publishing something in the Mitteiler or stay in contact with this lazy network anymore. So I don't know about that.
His daughter went with him to Chile. She also went. I assume his family, his daughter.
Still in South America, I would say.
She's saying she probably stayed.
Yeah, I mean, it started with marriage. She's probably had children as well, and so they're probably more assimilated into South America, so maybe they lost interest in all that. This is something to research in Santiago. Maybe
Next year.
Maybe I can tell you something.
They couldn't hear the story anymore.
Did he, from the beginning of leaving Breslau, did he already know that he is heading towards Shanghai? Because he was going, I understand, via Italy. So there would be at that time many refugees from Germany, German Jews or Polish Jews, who would go exactly flee at that time to Italy to stay there till the very late, till it was invaded by Germany, because it's from German Jewish perspective, this seemed to be still a safe place. So, I mean, why did he not stay in Italy, and did he from the beginning on know that he wants to?
Well, he doesn't tell about that, but I would assume that it was easier for him to.
Italy wasn't safe any longer. Italy stopped being safe especially for foreign Jews. They had to leave Italy. Not all did, but basically starting from the end or late summer of '38, so was this anti-Semitic turn in Italy, and foreign Jews had to leave, and it was clear that the situation was getting more and more complicated for Jews in Italy after this moment. So, and it was very common that you took a boat in Italian harbor. That this is very, it was one of the places to enter to start your journey on the
particularly to Shanghai to the east.
Yeah, so yes, to another possibility. Yeah, so that's no, I think it's and of course they had to go to Shanghai because Shanghai was the place where you could go without a visa. So they knew that they were going to probably they knew they were going to Shanghai because it was the only place, one of the very few places you really could go.
The last option, otherwise you would die.
If I may add to this, it's clear that up until the moment of Mussolini joined the war, the mainstream of the European Jews to escape for Shanghai was Trieste, and Trieste, Lloyd, and the Italians made the biggest money on that route. Your question?
Yeah, it's not a question, but the further comment. I would like to emphasize also that the only possible route was via Italy. So nobody was heading Italy to stay in Italy, just to leave for Shanghai, in which basically there was the need of visas, but nobody checked it. So the idea of Shanghai was that nobody was checking the visas, so nobody had visas. But it was only for German and Austrian Jews, this route. Polish Jews didn't use the route via Italy, they used this Kaunas-Vladivostok route. So Italy wasn't the case here. It was after closing the ports of the northern Europe, the only place to depart Europe for German and Austrian Jews.
When I mentioned that Italian served Italian Lloyd quite a lot, it came from the famous book of David Kranzler, The Jewish, Japanese and Shanghai Community. And my comment was because the topic of our conference, looking for that money to sell tickets, the prices were enormous high for using or the boat or after Italy joined the war, when only Trans-Siberia Railroad was the last route, and then Russians did that. Some unbelievable prices, and just counting the money. I already mentioned those facts from the Russian researcher side, that NKVD and the Russian secret services, they counted on that, and maybe deep in that dirt there were really the case of money to earn, and sometimes personal involvement from Gestapo to NKVD doing that yes, saving or earning money. That's for the historian, it's a question.
Well, I was saying in the United States, if you have a question you don't understand, follow the money, you'll find out. That's really what it is, all about money.
Yeah, we started debating your topic. The last word is for you. If you want. If not, then thank you so much for your paper. We can continue our talk with the cups of coffee.